My name is Aaron Kennedy. I am the CEO of Outway, but more importantly, this conversation is on the research that we did with the National Science Foundation in Pitkin County over the course of 2.5 years. I'm really excited about this. I came from a ranger and naturalist background before going into this, and I am lucky to be here with my friend and partner, Nathalie.
Yeah. What's up? My name is Nathalie. I'm a ranger with Pitkin County Open Space and Trails. Pitkin County Open Space and Trails has about 20,000 acres. We have 80 miles of trails, and we protect and maintain land for a multitude of reasons: wildlife, recreation, agriculture, scenic values, access are some of the reasons. But yeah, stoked to be here.
Really quick, before we get started, has anyone seen our talk before or any of the other talks we've given on this? Great. This one's entirely different, so that doesn't matter, but happy to know that. Really quick, shout out to our sponsor. Thank you, Mile High Flood District. Really excited. This is the first time our talk has been sponsored, so pretty exciting for us. And I will get kind of right into it really quick. One of the reasons why we're talking about collaboration is because in this space, whether it's the feds or the local level, resources across natural lands are facing a lot of challenges, right? So this is a graph. I can't tell how big it is for you guys, but this is a graph of the Zion National Park recreation visits relative to the number of full-time employees. Over the last 10 years, the recreation has doubled, and unfortunately, the number of full-time employees has decreased by over 10%. We see similar things with the Forest Service. If anyone else is from here, the Forest Service had a record number of 49,000 employees in 1985 and is now below 30 and facing twice as many annual fires. So we see this kind of across the board. We see it at local levels, and obviously we see it at the federal levels. Really quick, can I get a show of hands of how many people are rangers in here? Nice. How many people do some work in the field? Perfect. How many GIS people do you have in here? Great, I like a balance. This is perfect. So while visitation is obviously shared across property lines, there are plenty of other things, especially now facing more and more wildfire. We have water, and of course wildlife, invasive species, you name it. These are things that do not stop at property lines. We have visitors that go from Pitkin County to Aspen, to Forest Service, to state parks, all in the course of a week, right? This is kind of the inception of what this research focused on. The director of Pitkin County, Gary Tenenbaum, has helped us kind of formulate our ideas around this idea of seamless land management. When you have visitors or challenges that are going across property lines, how do you approach these challenges as if you're not alone? Because you're not alone. Just because it's on the other side of the fence doesn't mean there's not someone there to help. Luckily, these things don't stop at boundaries, right? Our ecosystems roll right over them. And unfortunately, that oftentimes means that we end up operating in isolation. And when we're having increasing challenges with decreasing resources to face them, being able to work across those property lines is more and more important. So, facing rising challenges together with collaborative stewardship by leveraging our community, data, and action. How many people, really quick, by a show of hands, feel like they have more data than they know what to do with? Nice, a little bit of a balance. Sometimes people feel like they have no data. Who feels like they have nothing? Love to see that too. So we did a stakeholder analysis of Pitkin County. This is actually now updated and has about 20 more organizations on it. This is how many organizations Pitkin County has to interact with in a given year. There are people who have either similar overlapping jurisdiction, like really close partners like the city of Aspen, or other partners such as educational partners in their local schools across their district. This is an incredibly important thing to understand because these are the people that can help you, right? These are the people that are involved. This includes visitors, and if you want to talk kind of about some of the other partners, not only just within your organization, but around your like partner organizations to target. So, for instance, like what does your work look like with the city of Aspen?
Oh, for sure. So we own a lot of properties that cross over, that are partnerships. So the city of Aspen, town of Snowmass Village, And then also we have nonprofits. So the Aspen Center for Environmental Studies, ACES, the Aspen Valley Land Trust holds a lot of our easements. So often we're working a lot with these partners, through ownership as well as partnerships, and education as well.
The list of people that you find on your stakeholder map are also the people that you have an opportunity to collaborate with. So knowing who has what data, who might need what information from you, or who can you collaborate on various projects, actions, grants, acquisitions, etc. This is your list, right? This is your hit list if you have those projects, and it's true for every organization and every community. The better we can work across these organizations, the easier it is for us to kind of figure out how to make more with less resources as we're continuing to face those challenges. So this is my favorite part, where we get to talk about, well, what does that actually look like when we have shared assets? So the Rio Grande Trail is 42 miles. It runs from Glenwood Springs all the way to downtown Aspen. It crosses multiple counties, multiple jurisdictions, even, I think, one nonprofit, the Transit Authority, and a couple of other stakeholders. So you can imagine that the management of these areas is horrendous.
And often those lines are invisible. A bicyclist riding from Aspen to Glenwood Springs wouldn't be aware of passing through the City of Aspen jurisdiction, Pitkin County, and then later to, as I understand, the Roaring Fork Transit Authority. There's also a multitude of jurisdiction styles and how that touch feels for people that are riding through that. The Transit Authority doesn't have rangers. Pitkin County and the City of Aspen do. So the presence that's seen in those is different in kind of the neighborhoods as you're passing on those 42 miles is also very different.
And what is the difference between your ranger team and the City of Aspen's ranger team?
There's a difference in styles, as well as the need and the direction. So the City of Aspen, a lot of their funding comes through sales tax. So often they take more of an ambassador kind of style in their enforcement. Pitkin County, our funding comes through property taxes, so we're able to take a little bit more of a code enforcement, stricter enforcement on those regulations. And then the Transit Authority obviously doesn't have rangers. So there are more commuters in that section, less so of those tourists and things like that.
Those differences, I think, are oftentimes where some people say, like, I'm not going to collaborate with that person because they have maybe a different philosophy or practice or implementation. So the fact that the City of Aspen doesn't actually do enforcement, they do kind of an education-based engagement, is very different, especially because, like, if the rangers don't know where the property's lines are, then the visitors certainly do not, right? That becomes really important when on one side you get a ticket, on the other side you get a talking to. So Pitkin County worked with the City of Aspen and have been doing this for a while, which is really simple. Oftentimes we think collaboration means, like, we have to be hand in hand in every single project, right? We have to be hand in hand in everything. This is easy. All they're doing is letting their rangers on each side of the board communicate their interactions. So allowing each team to have a contact record across them is something that has had a tremendous impact beyond just, hey, like, I have a log of who I talked to this month.
And so outside of the Rio Grande Trail, like I said, we own a lot of properties with the City of Aspen as well as Pitkin County and the town of Snowmass, in that our regulations are seamless, that the regulations still maintain and, like, are the same. While the City of Aspen has a lighter touch in their enforcement, we all kind of follow the same things. So we all take contact information for accountability, both for us as well as for the folks that they're speaking to or that we're contacting. So often we share those properties, and those regulations are the same. So sharing the records allows me, as a Pitkin County Ranger, when I start talking to someone, hey, your dog's off leash. Are you familiar with the rules and regulations on this trail? Oh, I see that you have spoken with Brian Long from the City of Aspen. While Brian may not have given them a citation, he probably has explained the rules and regulations to them. So I'm able to see that contact information in our databases, which allows to say that there's seamless enforcement while our touches are a little bit different.
So whether you're doing this for recreation or whether you're doing it for fire or whatever your work actually looks like, I think a key takeaway of this operation right here is the fact that they have a regular practice that they're doing in their job every day. They are sharing it across their team, and that is thus low cost, easy to implement, and fits into their already existing workflow. They're not adding any processes by doing this, right? It is literally their job to take those interactions, and all they're doing now is making them accessible to the other team. This is where I think people sometimes get scared of data, right? They think data means a bunch of analytics and statistics and big scary numbers. When in reality, data can be easy. So for instance, this one change allowed a couple things to happen really easily for them. The Rangers now have that full history that Nathalie just mentioned that allowed them to make informed decisions in the field. At the same time, it actually informs their supervisors. This allows their system-wide data to be knowledgeable for all of them. It allows Gary or Rick or Ryan or any of the supervisors above them to be able to make insights and decisions off of this. It also makes it far easier for them to advocate both for their team and for changes within their system. So everyone has been facing challenges with e-bikes. This is a good way that you can actually have information beyond your own jurisdiction, your own team, right, on how e-bikes are affecting your entire community. Especially because that trail, the Rio Grande Trail, is not only a recreation trail, but a commuter trail, and e-bikes are very prevalent on it. I think we're really happy also that this has helped, this practice of sharing this data has helped both teams hire new people. And I don't think Whitney's here, but yeah, cheers. Cheers to Whitney. So, super quick, in encapsulation of what that project has done and what it continues to do for them, collaboration does not need to be expensive. It doesn't need to be a giant lift that your team has to go out and do a ton of planning to be able to implement. Sharing can be simple, can be accessible, and that is where it has the biggest impact. When it can be just bringing down an existing barrier between people whose data impacts the other group. The team differences, you don't have to worry as much about them as you might think. There's definitely pieces of data that you want to protect. That's totally fine. Finding ways to do that and control those information flows is something we're going to get into. Next, sharing data makes decisions easier for everyone across the stack, right? If you think of the people in the field, to your supervisors, to your directors, to your boards, anyone you have to report to, the better you're able to communicate what is happening out there, the easier it is. Really often we see people show and they're like, hey, look at this beautiful trail that I've maintained for 6 months. And everyone's like, yeah, it looks great, sounds awesome. And you don't realize that you have spent hundreds of hours out there maintaining, tracking, talking to every single person who comes across. And it is a nightmare on how much information you actually have just lost by not being able to communicate that to your supervisor. How can you expect them to advocate for you if they don't know the work that's going on out there? So as I said, beyond recreational management, there are plenty of examples of this happening in our backyards. We're going to go through a working example of a prescribed burn. I will add a disclaimer. You do not need to know anything about prescribed fire. This is about a human challenge of communicating information through a project. This is not about fire. But it's an amazing project on how 5 teams have been able to work together and actually find ways to bring down those barriers. Because if you're collaborating across groups, you need to be able to understand what's happening as each person is working through the process, whether that's from the planning stage, to the reporting stage, to the implementation, or to the burn in this case. Similarly, invasive species, right? Invasive species are prevalent. A lot of really amazing examples of this in the southwest of the state that I love to see. Regional tracking, being able to have that information across properties is really important. If you're treating something incredibly thoroughly in a single area and then across the fence there is nothing happening, how much of a long-term effect are you really going to be able to implement in that area? And then we're going to go into another example here with wildlife and the urban-wildlife interface really quickly with Pitkin County.
Okay, so like I was talking about earlier, we own a lot of properties with multiple entities. One of these is a nature preserve on the east side of Aspen. It has several stakeholders. As we were discussing, those imaginary lines of jurisdiction, property lines and all of that, aren't apparent to people, neither are they to the wildlife. So in our nature preserve, we have the Aspen Valley Land Trust, the Aspen Center for Environmental Studies, the Forest Service, Pitkin County, City of Aspen, as well as the HOA of a neighborhood that is all there. That's a lot of players working in one zone. The wildlife, we have a predominant moose population up there. So those moose moving through that nature preserve, we have to communicate with all of those entities of what's happening. And then all the way up to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, whose animal that is. It becomes challenging to try and share all of that information to all of those groups. With this, we've been able to start to share the data, of where they are, what information we need to share to all of those different stakeholders, and how that works together.
So oftentimes I like to talk about this, which is the effort for collaboration in a given sector. Collaborating on information, as I said previously, is super easy. You could share a contact list. You could start a group chat. You could start a Google Sheets that's shared with everyone. Sharing information is incredibly easy. It's so much easier than like planning a project, an acquisition, in my case, finding what we're going to eat for dinner in the evening, or like applying for grants, right? There's a varying degree of difficulty on collaborating on these different things. Collaborating on a grant takes a ton of stakeholders, a ton of money, whatever it's going to take for you to pull that together. Collaborating on information can be a priority for a couple of reasons. One, again, as I said, super low cost. It's low risk. If you don't like what you're sharing, then you can just stop and unplug that, right? It's easy to implement, fits into your existing routines, and most importantly, what I just showed on the effort thing, it fuels all the other collaboration. So if you have more information on these topics, whether it's invasive species, recreation, fire, etc., it makes it far easier to justify, plan, and orchestrate projects, acquisitions, grants, etc., than having to go and scrape all that together every time we're trying to do these, get buy-in from other parties, bring down those kind of organizational barriers that we set up for any of that information. So as I have said, this is a human systems challenge, and it's really amazing how sometimes the best thing we can do is get out of our own way here. So, I don't want to have to go and send you a giant file or whatever anytime you are trying to do your job. If I can get out of your way and you can get what you need, oftentimes that's a far more effective use of resources and time than doing almost anything else I can do in my day. Some watch-outs when thinking about starting to collaborate. Again, whether it's an easy, low-level thing like just sharing a spreadsheet or something else. Make sure you're not creating additional work. Collaboration is great in theory. If you start to overcomplicate your processes, if you make it even harder for someone to do their job, then there's a good chance that a collaboration isn't going to be helpful at all because they might push it to the side. They might not prioritize it as part of their job. If you can fit it into their job, it's a much better process. Don't try to do it perfectly. Because it's so low risk, because it's so low cost, try to do something once and see how it impacts things. It'll, again, make it easier to justify doing a bigger project or doing something else. Making sure you can kind of get something going is far more effective than planning out your entire organizational strategy for collaboration over a 12-month period. And lastly, don't build additional barriers. For instance, if you are going to set up a new database, if you're a GIS person for someone, if you're doing that in an effort to pull together collaborative data and then no one can access that, you have now created an additional barrier that makes it even harder for people to get those pieces of data. So best practices, fit it into the existing workflow of whoever you're trying to collaborate with, connect with stakeholders automatically when you can, and choose achievable goals. Focus on bringing down the barriers between groups rather than building additional setup between those sectors. In our team, sometimes we can say, I don't really know how to change existing things. These are just a couple of things that we saw from those organizations we've researched in the NSF program on ways that you can find opportunities for collaboration. If you have to do something multiple times, that's a great indication that there is opportunity for improvement there. Nathalie, how many times do you have to transcribe your enforcements?
We put it on a sheet, we put it on a piece of paper, and then we also track it on digitally. So 3 times, if not 4 if you count entering it into our daily pass down.
If you have to wait for information, if you're sitting there and waiting for something and the season is ticking by, for instance in prescribed fire, if the season really matters for when you're going to be able to burn, and you have to continually wait and slow down that process, you might miss your entire annual window for that burn. Similarly, if there is important knowledge held by others that you're frequently having to go and ask, there are often easier ways that that person can provide access to that data in a more streamlined way where you can get to it without having to go through and wait for that every single time. If you're missing context, this is a message for the GIS people out there. Nathalie, when you're filling out your interaction forms, is there a GPS component to your data?
There is.
Now there is. There wasn't for a long time. It was, if you're filling out a paper form, oftentimes you don't have the lat long data, right? And then you have a whole other barrier where you're getting data, but it's not useful to you because you have no idea where it was actually happening. And it's very useful to the person who filled it out because they know where it happened. Similarly, if you have shared risk, this is the example we're going to go through. If there's shared risk in a situation, it's an awesome catalyst for collaborating because you're going to have to do it anyway, most likely. And lastly, if there's information outside of the scope of work, for instance, if you have data that applies a ton to someone else and they're asking you for it all the time, this is a great opportunity to be like, I should make it easier so that I don't have to spend 5-10 minutes, an hour getting this for you every single time. This is, per the steering committee, I added a little extra kind of data talk in here. I think it's approachable for everyone. We see it all the time. I've said it a bunch. If you can have something automated into the process, right? If you're filling something out and it automatically goes in the form that everyone needs to consume it, that's the best case scenario. Picture that all. If you're a data person, this is something that is achievable. Technology is amazing when you can use it properly. When you're building a new system for your team, think about the data flow. How does it go from the source, in this instance, the ranger, all the way to the consumer, which is the supervisor? Think about how it is being consumed at each step. This actually helps you make that process much easier. For instance, if it gets stuck in a spreadsheet that no one can ever access, it's not very useful to anyone. Accessibility is huge. Not everyone can read a map. Not everyone can read a spreadsheet, and vice versa, right? We have what's called a map test, where anytime we're talking about new ways to engage data, we bring it up to a 75-year-old man named Matt. He cannot use it. We do not use it. So, similarly, make whatever you're trying to get to the person accessible in the way that they can consume it. If you hand them a big data file and they are like, I don't know what this is, that's probably not a great medium for that person to consume it, and that collaboration is no longer useful. If you can, automate insights. If you're using a spreadsheet, you can set up a cell that just automatically tracks whatever you're putting in that form and gives you a number. For instance, like the total number of interactions that happened this month or this week in this instance of the recreation. Little things like these are accessible ways that data people can make data far more accessible to everyone else consuming it. Understand who your data impacts. For instance, if you were a ranger and you were out writing a ticket on shared property, probably impacts the other group. Thinking about those opportunities can have a much bigger impact than you realize beyond just maybe improving your job or their job. Making sure, I love this one, making sure the data is what you need. How many people have heard or talked about buying GPS data from cell phone providers? This was a common topic 2 years ago at COSA, and it can be a really powerful thing, right? It can be a really powerful thing to justify kind of larger scale recreation. Another talk at COSA 2 years ago that I loved pointed out maybe the more important thing, which is that actually how you're going to be spending your money, or are you buying that data to justify to someone else to get more money? Different people need different things from their data. If you're prioritizing new projects, visitation is often not the most important data. Capacity is. If your parking lots are overflowing, that is something that the rangers would know. They would have the records on overflowing parking lots. If your trails are eroding out because there is a bunch of social trails or other things are cross-cutting or shortcutting happening, that's data that your rangers would have. These are important pieces where the context of that data on how many people were on a trail might not be as useful as the problems that are being faced by your team that are already out there. So in that event, let me show you 2 free resources that I love. One of them, this really pretty, amazing, incredibly powerful heat map is activity specific. You can filter by whatever activity you want or whatever season you want. You can have base maps, you can do whatever you want. This is free on Strava.com to everyone. You don't even have to make an account. Obviously, you can't run analysis on this, and so GIS people, take that with a grain of salt, but this is a free resource that you can actually have on different forms of recreation on your property. Very similarly, one of my favorite groups that we've ever worked with is the city of Phoenix. This is a Google Map. Google Map has free and available resources for you to make information available on their service. This is what they use instead of a really built out custom thing. These are two amazing resources. I have a catalog of probably 75 amazing companies and resources like these. If you ever want them, please just reach out. So this is where we're going to transition really quick to our actual exercise, which hopefully will be very fun and interactive for everyone. Thank you so much for coming and hearing our talk on collaborative stewardship and how we can use data to make more from less as we continue to battle for resources here.